on a little bit more about the carpel. We have, of course, this was the stigma and the style of the carpel, and then this part would be the ovary. There's just kind of looking at it a little more detailed. You would have the ovary wall, which would be kind of the thickness, the thick part that is surrounding the outside or lining the inside of the ovary. And then you have the placenta, which would be the tissue that is just inside, that is lining the locule, which is the space that is surrounding the ovule. So this is empty space. The placenta would be lining that, and the ovule would be attached to the placenta. All right, so there's things that are called placentation. So let's just kind of go over what these things are. All right, so the placentation, let's just look at the first one. So these are top views. So the first one is the basal or apical. That means that you have one ovule that is going to be, like in this case, this would be a basal one. Or if it was apical, it would be attached to the top or somewhere near the top. Okay, so that's where the ovule would attach. Parietal means that you have ovules that are on the outside edge. Another view of that would be a picture like this. So this might be showing a carpal cross section, parietal. Axial would mean that it would have along a central axis. And in this case, it's showing you 3 separate locules. So in the division, I have 3 locules here, each with ovaries attached in the center. So this would be an axial placentation. And then you also have something called free central, where you have like a central septum where the ovules are attached. So in this case, it would be like a kind of a stalk with many ovules attached to it along that stalk. And this is a better picture of that perhaps. And this is the diagrammatic top view. Okay, so those are the different kinds of placentation. We also have what they call levels of insertion, or different types of flowers based on where the different sepals, petals, stamen, and carpel come in together. Okay, so let's just kind of look at that. So this is something that's called hypogynous. What this is where you have, this is, fairly common, where you have just what we sort of have been talking about in terms of theory. That is sepals first, petals next, stamen next, and the ovary, that is the carpel on top. And this would be the ovary is superior to everything else. So it's on top, or the other flower structures are below. Then you have perigynous. Perigynous is where the sepals and the petals might be connate. That is, they might kind of come together, and then the stamens also might be coming. It would come off down here, but they would maybe look like they were part of the flower structure. So from the top, what you would be seeing is you would be seeing the petals below these the sepals, but then all you see is a little bit of the stigma and style sticking out because the ovary is down inside the other flower parts. But if you did a cross section, you would see a clear space of the ovary or the carpel sitting on top of the receptacle and on top of the sepals, petals, and stamens. All right, so this is kind of like that. It's just that these things have all kind of fused around and it doesn't look like that. All right, and then you have the epigynous. This is where you actually have the receptacle sort of going around then the ovary. This is very protective, and then the sepals would be coming off kind of on top of where the ovary is. So the ovary then is inferior or below, and what you see as part of the flower is similar to this. That is, you see the petals and the stamens and the little part of the stigma and style sticking out. But in cross section, you literally see this within the receptacle. And this is sometimes then called the floral tube instead of just the receptacle, to designate it from the actual stalk of the inflorescence, which would be down here. So this would be like the receptacle, and this would be floral tube. But in essence, it's all the ovary is embedded in the receptacle. All right, so, and then to finish up with the rest of the terminology. So let's go over a bunch of these terms. Okay, so flowers with both stamen and carpel are what we call perfect, or also called bisexual. That is, they have both male and female parts. If they have just one or the other, and there are flowers that are just male flowers or just female flowers, if they're just female flowers, they're called carpellate. If they're just male flowers, they're called staminate. And if you have, in this case, if you have both of them occurring on the same plant, the plant would be considered monoecious. That is, you have carpellate and staminate flowers on the same plant. It's not the same as bisexual, which would be you would have male and female parts in the same flower, okay? And then if they're found on separate plants, like French trees, for example, they're called dioecious, meaning that there's two houses or two plants, two separate plants, one male and one female. Plants that exist like that, you have to have both male and female to get reproductive structures or fruits created from the flowers. Okay, so then flowers that, so let's just say what a whorl is. A whorl is just a flower parts, the sepals, petals, stamens, and carpels. They are also called whorls. In essence, it's kind of like where the branches would come off of that modified, where the leaves would come off of that modified branch, and the leaves, modified leaves being sepals, petals, stamens, carpels. All right, so flowers generally have 4 whorls, and flowers with all 4 whorls are what we call complete, and if they're lacking any of the whorls, they're called incomplete. And that the members of a whorl, if they are united with, I went too far. Flowers with, so we've talked about perfect flowers and imperfect, and then complete and incomplete. So an imperfect flower, which would be one that is either male or female, would also be incomplete, right? Because it would be lacking either the stamen or the carpel, depending. But not all incomplete flowers, that is lacking a whorl, are imperfect. In other words, they could be lacking a whorl of sepals or petals and still have the stamen and carpel, and therefore would still be the perfect bisexual organism. All right. So next, I kind of skipped down before. So members of a whorl, if they are united, is called connated, or connation, and if they are separate, it's called adnation. If it's connated, the prefix sin or sim is used, and if it's adnate, the prefix apo or poly can be used. So, for example, an aposepalous, it has separate sepals, whereas a synsepalous would have the calyx or the sepals joined. All right. Now, lastly, let's look at symmetry. Symmetry is just what a flower looks like, and there's 2 basic kinds. Radial is kind of what you always drew when you were a little kid. This is also called actinomorphic. It's like a sunflower, a daisy, a zinnia. So here's a zinnia for you. It's basically actinomorphic, or even, mostly even all the way around. Or you can have an irregular symmetry. This is called zygomorphic, like orchids, and also the pagoda plant that we looked at earlier. You can see that it's basically all on one side. So this would be a zygomorphic flower.